Step into History Page, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot brings timeless mysteries to life.
In the shadowy halls of Crestwell Manor Hotel, a scream pierces the stormy night. A young woman lies dead, a monogrammed letter opener in her heart, and the initials A.V. Whisper of a killer hiding in plain sight. Who was Clara Henshaw, and what secret drove her to this secluded Devonshire retreat? Was it a lost inheritance, a family scandal, or a truth too dangerous to uncover? Enter Hercule Poirot, the brilliant Belgian detective whose little gray cells unravel a web of lies, red herrings, and buried pasts. With every clue, a burned letter, a mysterious note, a scratch on a desk, the suspense tightens. Can you guess the murderer before Poirot reveals the shocking truth? Dive into the Monogram Murders, a classic Agatha Christie-style mystery where no one is what they seem, and the past refuses to stay buried. Chapter 1. The Quiet Before the Storm. In the waning days of autumn 1929, the village of Crestwell-on-Sea wore an air of deceptive tranquility. Nestled along the rugged Devonshire coast, its cobbled streets wound gently between quaint cottages in a smattering of grander homes, their windows glowing warmly against the encroaching dusk. At the heart of the village stood the Crestwell Manor Hotel, a Georgian edifice of pale stone, its ivy-clad walls and tall chimneys exuding an aura of timeless elegance. The hotel was a favored retreat for those seeking respite from London's clamor. And on this particular October evening, it played host to a small but eclectic gathering of guests, each drawn to its promise of solitude and refinement. The dining room, with its polished oak floors and chandeliers casting a soft golden light, buzzed with the polite murmur of conversation. At one end of the long mahogany table sat Lady Eleanor Marwood, a widow of considerable wealth and sharper wit, her silver hair swept into an impeccable chignon. Her emerald brooch glinted as she leaned forward to address her companion, Mr. Gerald Whitmore, a retired solicitor with a penchant for florid waistcoats and a nervous habit of adjusting his spectacles. Across from them, Miss Clara Henshaw, a young heiress with a penchant for novels and a distracted air, toyed with her soup spoon, her eyes darting toward the window as if expecting some unseen visitor. Beside her, Dr. Maurice Langston, a physician of middle years with a perpetually furrowed brow, sipped his wine in silence, his thoughts seemingly elsewhere. At the table's head sat the hotel's proprietor, Mr. Rupert Grayson, a man of imposing stature whose genial smile masked a shrewd business mind. His wife, Mrs. Beatrice Grayson, fluttered about the room, ensuring every guest's glass was filled and every plate attended. The atmosphere, though cordial, carried an undercurrent of unease. Perhaps it was the storm brewing over the sea, its distant rumbles audible through the half-open windows. Or perhaps it was the curious monogrammed handkerchief embroidered with the initials A.V., which had been found that morning on the hotel's grand staircase, its owner unknown. The staff had speculated idly about it, but no guest had claimed it, and its presence lingered like an unanswered question. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal friend of Hercule Poirot, sat near the fireplace nursing a glass of port. He had come to Crestwell-on-Sea at Poirot's insistence, though the little Belgian detective had been maddeningly vague about the purpose of their visit. "A rest, mon ami," Poirot had said with a twinkle in his eye, "but one must always be prepared for the unexpected." Hastings, accustomed to Poirot's cryptic pronouncements, had acquiesced, though he found the hotel's polished charm a touch stifling. He observed the other guests with mild curiosity, noting the way Lady Marwood's sharp gaze lingered on Mr. Whitmore, or how Miss Henshaw's fingers trembled slightly as she reached for her glass. The clock on the mantelpiece struck 8, its chimes resonating through the room. Dinner was drawing to a close and the guests began to disperse, some to the drawing room for cards, others to their suites. Hastings rose, intending to retire early, when a piercing scream shattered the evening's calm. It came from the direction of the library, a wood-paneled sanctuary at the rear of the hotel. The guests froze, their faces a mixture of shock and apprehension. Mr. Grayson, ever the composed host, was the first to move, striding toward the sound with a grim determination. Hastings followed, his heart quickening, sensing that the quiet evening had taken a sinister turn. The library door stood ajar, and within the scene was one of stark horror. Sprawled across the Persian rug, her eyes wide and unseeing, lay Miss Clara Henshaw. Her pale blue evening gown was stained with a spreading crimson, and a silver letter opener, its handle monogrammed with the same AV as the mysterious handkerchief, protruded from her chest. The room was otherwise undisturbed. No overturned furniture, no sign of a struggle. The window, latched from the inside, admitted only the faint howl of the wind. A single candelabrum flickered on the desk, casting eerie shadows across the walls. Mr. Grayson knelt beside the body, his face ashen. "She's dead," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Lady Marwood, who had followed the men into the room, let out a stifled gasp, her hand clutching her brooch. Dr. Langston pushed past her, his medical instincts taking over as he checked for a pulse, though the effort was futile. Mr. Whitmore hovered in the doorway, his spectacles fogging with nervous perspiration. Mrs. Grayson, arriving last, clutched her husband's arm, her eyes wide with terror. "Who could have done this?" she whispered. "We were all at dinner, weren't we?" Hastings, his mind racing, recalled the precise order of events. Dinner had begun at 7, and all the guests had been present, or so it seemed. Miss Henshaw had excused herself shortly before the scream, claiming a headache. The others had lingered at the table, save for Dr. Langston, who had stepped out briefly to fetch a cigar from his room. Or had he? Hastings cursed his own lack of attention, wishing Poirot were there to dissect the moment with his usual precision. The local constable, a stout man named Sergeant Brooks, arrived within the hour, his notebook in hand and his expression one of grim determination. He surveyed the scene, taking note of the letter opener and the locked window. "Looks like a clear case," he muttered, though his tone betrayed uncertainty. "Someone in this hotel is a murderer." The guests were ushered to the drawing room, where they sat in uneasy silence, each casting furtive glances at the others. Hastings, his thoughts still on Poirot, felt a pang of frustration. Where was the little Belgian when he was needed most? As if summoned by the thought, the door swung open, and there stood Hercule Poirot himself, his impeccable black suit and polished shoes a stark contrast to the disarray around him. His mustache, perfectly symmetrical, twitched slightly as he surveyed the room, his green eyes gleaming with quiet intensity. "Mon ami," he said, nodding to Hastings, "it seems our rest has been interrupted by a matter most grave." The guests turned to him, some with curiosity, others with suspicion. Poirot's reputation preceded him, and his presence seemed to shift the room's atmosphere, as though order might yet be restored to chaos. He stepped forward, his cane tapping lightly on the floor, and addressed Sergeant Brooks. "Monsieur, I am Hercule Poirot. With your permission, I would like to examine the scene of this tragedy." Brooks, clearly out of his depth, nodded eagerly. "Anything you can do, Mr. Poirot. This is a devil of a case." Poirot inclined his head, then turned to Hastings. "Come, my friend. Let us see what the little gray cells can uncover." As they made their way to the library, Poirot's demeanor was calm, almost serene, but Hastings knew better. Beneath the polished exterior, Poirot's mind was already at work, piecing together the fragments of a puzzle that would soon reveal its secrets, or so he hoped. The monogrammed letter opener, the locked window, the handkerchief found earlier that day, these were no mere coincidences, Hastings was certain. But what did they mean? And who among the hotel's guests harbored the heart of a killer? The storm outside grew louder, its thunder rolling across the sea as Poirot knelt beside the body of Clara Henshaw. He studied her face, her hands, the precise angle of the letter opener. "Curieux," he murmured, his fingers brushing the monogram. "Very curious indeed." Hastings watched, his own mind a whirl of questions. The night was young, and the mystery had only just begun. Chapter 2. The Crime Unveiled. The library of Crestwell Manor Hotel, bathed in the flickering glow of the candelabrum, seemed to hold its breath as Hercule Poirot knelt beside the lifeless form of Clara Henshaw. The air was thick with the metallic scent of blood and the faint tang of sea salt carried through the latched window. Outside, the storm over the Devonshire coast gathered strength, its intermittent thunder punctuating the oppressive silence within. Captain Arthur Hastings stood near the door, his eyes darting between Poirot's meticulous movements and the grim scene before them. The monogrammed letter opener, its silver blade stained crimson, protruded from Miss Henshaw's chest, the initials A.V. gleaming accusingly in the candlelight. Poirot's gloved fingers traced the air above the body, never touching, as if mapping an invisible web of clues. His green eyes, sharp and unyielding, took in every detail: the precise angle of the letter opener, the undisturbed folds of Clara's gown, the faint smudge of ink on her left hand. "Observe, Hastings," he said softly, his voice carrying that familiar blend of authority and curiosity. "The wound is clean, precise. The killer struck with confidence, yet there is no sign of struggle. This was no act of passion, but one of calculation." Hastings nodded, though his stomach churned at the sight. "She can't have been dead long," he ventured. "We heard her scream not half an hour ago." "Précisément," Poirot replied, rising to his feet with a grace that belied the gravity of the moment. "The time, it is critical. Let us establish the order of events." He turned to Sergeant Brooks, who stood awkwardly by the desk, clutching his notebook. "Monsieur, may I ask what you have noted thus far?" Brooks cleared his throat, his round face flushed. "Well, sir, it's a queer business. Miss Henshaw was at dinner with the others at 7 o'clock. She excused herself around 10 minutes to 8, saying she had a headache. Not 5 minutes later, we heard the scream. I arrived at 8:15, and Dr. Langston confirmed she was dead, stabbed, likely instantly." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sure sign his mind was racing. "And the other guests?" Where were they at the moment of the scream? Brooks flipped through his notes. All accounted for, sir, or so they say. Mr. Grayson was clearing the table with his wife. Lady Marwood and Mr. Whitmore were still in the dining room chatting. Dr. Langston had stepped out to his room for a cigar, but says he was back in the hall when the scream came. The staff, 2 maids and the cook, were in the kitchen. Poirot nodded, his gaze drifting to the window. And this window, it was latched when you arrived? Yes, sir, Brooks confirmed. Locked tight from the inside. No one could have come or gone that way. Bon, Poirot murmured, though his tone suggested he was far from satisfied. He crossed to the desk where a single sheet of paper lay, its edge slightly crumpled. The paper bore a half-finished letter in Clara's neat hand, addressed to "My dearest E." The contents were mundane, a description of the hotel, the sea, the weather, but Poirot lingered over it, his fingers hovering above the ink smudge. Curieux, he said again, almost to himself. This ink is fresh, yet the letter is incomplete. Why did she stop writing? Hastings, trying to keep pace with Poirot's thoughts, ventured. Perhaps she was interrupted. By the killer? Perhaps, Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. But why write a letter in the library when her room would offer privacy? And this smudge, he pointed to Clara's left hand. She was right-handed, non? Yet the ink is on her left, a small detail, but one that does not fit. Sergeant Brooks, looking increasingly out of his depth, coughed. Begging your pardon, Mr. Poirot, but it seems straightforward. Someone slipped in, stabbed her, and slipped out. The letter openers got those initials, A.V., and we found that handkerchief with the same monogram this morning. Could be the killer's calling card. Poirot's lips curved into a faint smile, one that Hastings recognized as a sign of polite disagreement. A calling card, you say? Non, Sergeant. A murderer who leaves such an obvious mark is either a fool or a genius, and I suspect we are not dealing with a fool. The monogram, it is too convenient. We must look beyond the obvious. He turned his attention to the letter opener, examining it without touching. This weapon, it is elegant, non? Not a common tool, but one of personal significance. We must discover to whom it belongs. He glanced at Hastings. Mon ami, fetch Mr. Grayson. He will know the contents of his hotel. Hastings hurried to the drawing room where the guests sat in uneasy silence. Lady Marwood clutched a handkerchief not monogrammed, Hastings noted, while Mr. Whitmore stared into his glass of brandy, his hands trembling. Mrs. Grayson hovered near her husband, her face pale but composed. Dr. Langston stood by the window, his expression unreadable. Hastings relayed Poirot's request, and Mr. Grayson followed him back to the library, his broad shoulders tense. Mr. Grayson, Poirot began, gesturing to the letter opener. This object, it is familiar to you? Grayson's eyes widened as he leaned closer. Good heavens, it's from the hotel's collection. We keep a set of silver desk tools in the study just off the hall, but I swear I checked them this morning and none were missing. And the initials, A.V.? Poirot pressed. They mean nothing to you? Grayson shook his head. None of our guests have those initials, nor the staff. I thought the handkerchief we found might belong to a past guest, but this... He trailed off, his confidence faltering. Poirot dismissed him with a nod, then turned to Brooks. Sergeant, I suggest you secure the study and examine this collection of desk tools. Hastings, you will assist me in speaking with the guests. Their alibis, their secrets, they will tell us more than they intend. The drawing room was a study in contrasts. Lady Marwood's icy composure, Mr. Whitmore's nervous fidgeting, Dr. Langston's brooding silence, and Mrs. Grayson's anxious hovering. Poirot took a seat, his small frame commanding the room's attention. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice calm but piercing, "a young woman lies dead, and one among us knows why. I, Hercule Poirot, will find the truth. Let us begin with the simplest question. Where were you when Mademoiselle Henshaw screamed?" Lady Marwood spoke first, her voice crisp. "I was in the dining room discussing a business matter with Mr. Whitmore. We never left our seats." Whitmore nodded vigorously. "Quite right. We were talking about, investments. Didn't hear a thing until the scream." Dr. Langston's response was slower, measured. "I'd gone to my room for a cigar. I was in the hallway near the stairs when I heard it. I ran to the library at once." Mrs. Grayson clutched her husband's arm. "We were clearing the table. The maids can confirm it." Poirot's eyes gleamed as he listened, noting not just the words, but the pauses, the glances, the slight tremor in Whitmore's voice. "And Mademoiselle Henshaw," he said, "did she seem distressed at dinner? Did she speak of anyone or anything unusual?" The guests exchanged looks, their silence heavy. Finally, Lady Marwood said, "She was quiet, distracted. She mentioned a letter she needed to write, but nothing more." Poirot nodded, filing the detail away. "Merci. We will speak again, I assure you." He rose, signaling the end of the interview, but his gaze lingered on each guest as if peering into their souls. As the guests dispersed, Hastings leaned close. "What do you make of it, Poirot? The locked window, the monogram, the letter, it's all so tangled." Poirot smiled faintly. "Tangled, yes, but not impenetrable. The truth, it is like a knot, Hastings. Pull the right thread and it unravels. We must find that thread." The storm outside roared, a fitting echo of the turmoil within Crestwell Manor Hotel. Poirot's little gray cells were at work, and Hastings knew the game was well and truly afoot. Chapter 3. The arrival of Poirot's method. The storm had settled into a relentless rhythm by the time Hercule Poirot and Captain Arthur Hastings returned to the drawing room of Crestwell Manor Hotel. The rain lashed against the tall windows, casting rivulets of shadow across the room's ornate wallpaper, while the wind howled like a restless spirit. The guests, still gathered in their uneasy cluster, looked up as Poirot entered, his polished shoes clicking softly on the parquet floor. His presence, though diminutive, carried the weight of authority, and the air seemed to tighten with anticipation. Hastings, trailing behind, felt the familiar stir of excitement mixed with unease. Poirot was about to set the wheels of his methodical mind in motion, and no detail, however small, would escape his scrutiny. Poirot took his place by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, his mustache impeccably aligned. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and deliberate, "a crime has been committed, and it is no ordinary crime. Mademoiselle Clara Henshaw, a young woman of promise, lies dead, and the truth of her death lies hidden among us. I, Hercule Poirot, have been called to this place, not by chance, but by necessity. Let us proceed with order and precision." Hastings, standing near the door, noted the reactions of the guests. Lady Eleanor Marwood sat ramrod straight, her lips pressed into a thin line, her emerald brooch catching the firelight. Mr. Gerald Whitmore fidgeted with his spectacles, his florid waistcoat slightly askew. Dr. Maurice Langston leaned against the mantel, his furrowed brow deepening, while Mr. and Mrs. Grayson sat close together, her hand resting nervously on his arm. The atmosphere was one of strained civility, each guest aware that suspicion hung over them like a storm cloud. Poirot's eyes swept the room, lingering on each face. First, I must understand the victim. Mademoiselle Henshaw. What was her purpose here at Crestwell Manor? Who knew her, and what secrets did she carry? Mr. Grayson cleared his throat, his genial host's demeanor strained. Miss Henshaw arrived 3 days ago alone. She said she was here for a quiet holiday, to read and walk by the sea. She kept to herself mostly, though she was polite enough at meals. Polite but distant, Lady Marwood interjected, her voice sharp. She spoke little, and when she did, it was vague. Talk of novels, the weather, nothing of substance. I assumed she was recovering from some personal matter. Poirot tilted his head, his gaze fixed on Lady Marwood. A personal matter, you say? Did she give any hint of this matter? Lady Marwood hesitated, her fingers tightening on her handkerchief. Not directly, but yesterday at tea she mentioned a letter she was expecting. She seemed anxious about it. Poirot nodded, filing the detail away. And you, Monsieur Whitmore, did you speak with her? Whitmore's hand stilled, his spectacles slipping down his nose. Only in passing, sir. She asked me about the history of the village once, said she was curious about old families here. I told her about the Crestwells who built this manor centuries ago. Nothing more. Dr. Langston spoke next, his voice low and measured. She consulted me briefly 2 days ago, said she wasn't sleeping well. I prescribed a mild sedative, but she seemed preoccupied, not ill. Mrs. Grayson, her eyes red-rimmed, added, she was kind to the staff, always thanking the maids. But she spent hours in the library writing or reading. I thought she was working on something private. Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign that these fragments were forming a pattern in his mind. Bon. Now let us turn to the moment of the crime. The scream was heard at 5 minutes to 8. Sergeant Brooks, you have spoken with the staff. What do they say? Brooks, who had been hovering near the doorway, stepped forward, flipping open his notebook. The maids, Jenny and Rose, were in the kitchen with the cook, Mrs. Pollard, preparing tomorrow's breakfast. They heard the scream and thought it came from the library. Jenny says she saw no one in the hall when she ran to check. And the study? Poirot asked, referring to the room where the monogrammed letter opener had originated. It is near the library, no? Yes, sir, Brooks replied. Just across the hall. I checked it myself. The desk tools were there, but one slot was empty, the letter opener, I reckon. No fingerprints, though. Someone wiped it clean. Poirot's eyes gleamed. Wiped clean, you say? Yet the monogram remains bold and accusing, a curious choice for a murderer to leave such a mark. He turned to the guests. This letter opener with the initials AV, does it stir any memory? Speak now, for the truth will not remain hidden. The room fell silent, save for the crackle of the fire. Lady Marwood's gaze flickered to Dr. Langston, who stared resolutely at the floor. Whitmore adjusted his spectacles again, his hands trembling. Mr. Grayson exchanged a glance with his wife, who shook her head slightly. No one spoke. Poirot smiled faintly, undeterred. Very well. Silence, too, is a clue. Let us examine the library once more. Hastings, you will accompany me. The library, now cordoned off by Sergeant Brooks' orders, was as they had left it, Clara's body covered with a sheet, the letter opener removed for evidence, the half-finished letter still on the desk. Poirot moved with purpose, his cane tapping lightly as he circled the room. He paused by the window, testing the latch. Locked, as the sergeant said, yet the wind, it is strong tonight. Could it mask the sound of an entry? Hastings frowned. But the latch is secure, Poirot. No one could have come through without breaking it. Précisément, Poirot said, his voice almost a whisper. And that is why we must consider the impossible. The locked window, the monogram, the letter. These are pieces of a puzzle, but the picture is not yet clear. He knelt by the desk, examining the letter again. The ink smudge on Clara's hand drew his attention once more. This smudge, Hastings. It is on her left hand, yet she wrote with her right. Why? Perhaps she touched the paper while it was wet, Hastings suggested. Perhaps, Poirot said, but his tone suggested skepticism. He lifted the letter, holding it to the light. The paper is of fine quality, the ink fresh. And the words, my dearest E. Who is this E? A lover? A friend? An enemy? Hastings, trying to keep up, said, could it be Lady Marwood? Her name is Eleanor. Poirot's eyes sparkled. A good thought, mon ami, but we must not leap to conclusions. The letter mentions no specifics, only pleasantries. Yet she wrote it here in the library, not her room. Why? He moved to the bookshelf, running a gloved finger along the spines. A small volume, a guide to Devonshire history, caught his eye. It was slightly askew, as if recently handled. He pulled it out, flipping through the pages. A folded note slipped to the floor, bearing the same monogram. A V. Poirot unfolded it carefully. The note read, meet me at 7:45. Library. Urgent. Hastings' eyes widened. Good Lord, Poirot, that's just before the scream. Someone lured her here. Poirot nodded, his expression grave. Oui, and this note, it is no coincidence. The monogram, the letter opener, the handkerchief, they are threads of the same cloth. But whose hand wove them? He tucked the note into his pocket, his mind clearly racing. As they returned to the drawing room, Poirot addressed the guests once more. Mes amis, a discovery has been made. A note inviting Mademoiselle Henshaw to the library at the very moment of her death. I ask again, who among you knows of this A.V.? The silence was deafening, broken only by a sharp intake of breath from Mrs. Grayson. It's impossible, she whispered. No one here. Poirot's gaze softened, but his voice was firm. Impossible, madame. No. The truth is here, in this room. And I, Hercule Poirot, will find it. The storm raged on, and Hastings felt a chill that had little to do with the weather. The little gray cells were at work, and the mystery was deepening. Chapter 4. The questions begin. The drawing room of Crestwell Manor Hotel, with its heavy velvet curtains and crackling fire, seemed to shrink under the weight of Hercule Poirot's presence. The storm outside battered the windows, its relentless drumming a stark contrast to the Belgian detective's calm, measured tone. The guests, seated in a tense semicircle, watched him with a mixture of apprehension and curiosity. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing near the door, felt the familiar thrill of watching Poirot's mind at work. Each question a scalpel, cutting through the veneer of politeness to expose the raw nerves beneath. Poirot stood by the fireplace, his small frame radiating authority, His green eyes, sharp as cut glass, moved from face to face, lingering just long enough to unsettle. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice soft but commanding. "The death of Mademoiselle Clara Henshaw is no accident, no sudden act of violence. It is a crime of precision planned with care, and so we must proceed with equal precision. I will speak with each of you, and I ask for the truth, for lies. They will only delay the inevitable." He turned first to Lady Eleanor Marwood, whose silver hair and emerald brooch gleamed in the firelight. "Madam, you spoke of Mademoiselle Henshaw's distraction at tea yesterday. This letter she awaited. Did she say who sent it or what it concerned?" Lady Marwood's lips tightened, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "She said nothing specific, Monsieur Poirot. Only that she expected a letter and hoped it would arrive soon. I assumed it was a personal matter, perhaps family business. She was not the sort to confide." Poirot nodded, his mustache twitching slightly. "And yet you noticed her anxiety. A woman of your perception, madam, does not miss such details. Was there anything else, her manner, her words, that struck you?" Lady Marwood hesitated, her gaze flickering toward Mr. Whitmore. "She seemed guarded. When I asked if she was well, she changed the subject, speaking of the sea and the cliffs. It was as if she wished to avoid scrutiny." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Bon. And you, Monsieur Whitmore?" He turned to the retired solicitor, whose florid waistcoat seemed to wilt under the detective's scrutiny. "You spoke with Mademoiselle Henshaw about the history of Crestwell. Was this a casual conversation, or did she seek something specific?" Whitmore adjusted his spectacles, his fingers trembling. "Oh, quite casual, sir. She asked about the Crestwell family, their old manor. Nothing unusual. I told her the manor was sold off years ago, turned into this hotel. She seemed interested, but not overly so." "Interested, you say?" Poirot mused. "And yet she sought you out for this information. Did she mention any names, perhaps connected to the Crestwells?" Whitmore shook his head vigorously. "No names. Just general curiosity. She said she liked old houses, their stories." Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Maurice Langston, whose brooding presence by the mantel seemed to draw the room's shadows. "Docteur, you prescribed a sedative for Mademoiselle Henshaw. Did she confide in you about her sleeplessness? Was there a cause she mentioned?" Langston's brow furrowed, his voice low. "She said she was troubled by dreams. Nothing specific, just vague anxieties. I examined her briefly. Her health was sound, but her nerves were frayed. I gave her a mild dose of chloral hydrate, nothing strong. She thanked me and left." Poirot tilted his head. "And when you stepped out for your cigar, just before the scream, where exactly were you?" Langston's eyes narrowed, but he answered steadily. "In the hallway near my room on the first floor. I'd just retrieved the cigar from my case when I heard the scream. I ran to the library at once." "Précisément," Poirot said, his tone neutral but probing. "And you saw no one else in the hall?" "No one," Langston replied, though his fingers tightened briefly on the mantel. Poirot turned to Mr. and Mrs. Grayson, who sat close together, her hand still clutching his arm. "Monsieur Grayson, you checked the study's desk tools this morning, yet the letter opener was missing by evening. Did anyone enter the study during the day?" Grayson frowned, his broad face creased with worry. "Not that I know of, sir. The study's open to guests. It's where we keep stationery, books, that sort of thing. Anyone could have gone in, I suppose." "And you, Madame Grayson," Poirot continued. "You observed Mademoiselle Henshaw in the library often. Did she ever meet anyone there there?" Mrs. Grayson's voice was soft, nervous. "She was usually alone, reading or writing. I never saw her with anyone." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "Merci. Your cooperation is most helpful." He paused, letting the silence settle over the room. "Now, I must ask a delicate question. The initials A.V. They appear on the handkerchief, the letter opener, and a note found in the library. Does anyone know to whom they belong?" The room grew still, the only sound the storm's distant rumble. Lady Marwood's lips parted, but she said nothing. Whitmore's spectacles slipped again, his face pale. Langston stared at the floor while the Graysons exchanged a glance. No one spoke. Poirot smiled faintly. "Very well. The truth it hides, but not for long." He turned to Sergeant Brooks, who stood by the door. "Sergeant, I would like to examine the study now. Hastings, you will join me." The study, a small room off the main hall, was lined with bookshelves and dominated by a heavy oak desk. The set of silver desk tools sat in a velvet-lined case, one slot conspicuously empty. Poirot examined the case, his gloved fingers tracing the edges. "The letter opener, it was taken today, non? Yet no one noticed. Curious." Hastings, peering over his shoulder, said, "Could someone have taken it earlier and hidden it?" "Possible," Poirot replied, his eyes scanning the room. He moved to a small table where a guest ledger lay open. Flipping through it, he paused at a page dated a month earlier. "Regardez, Hastings. A guest named Anthony Vaughan stayed here 3 weeks ago." Initials of V. Hastings' eyes widened. "Good Lord, Poirot, could he be the killer?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "A name, Hastings, is not a confession, but it is a thread to pull." He closed the ledger, his expression thoughtful. "We must learn more about this Monsieur Vaughan, and we must return to the library." Back in the library, Poirot knelt by the desk, studying the crumpled letter again. The ink smudge on Clara's hand haunted him. He lifted the paper, tilting it to the light. "This letter, it is incomplete. Why stop mid-sentence? And this E, who is it?" Hastings ventured. "Lady Marwood, perhaps. Or someone else." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "We shall see, but first the note." He produced the folded paper with the AV monogram. "This meeting at 7:45, it was a trap, non? The killer knew she would come." The storm's roar seemed to underscore Poirot's words. Hastings felt a chill, sensing the web of deceit tightening around the guests. Poirot's little gray cells were weaving a net, and soon, someone would be caught. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The storm over Crestwell-on-Sea raged with unrelenting fury, its thunder shaking the very walls of Crestwell Manor Hotel. Inside, the atmosphere was no less charged, as Hercule Poirot's investigation into the murder of Clara Henshaw began to stir the carefully maintained facades of the hotel's guests. The drawing room, with its flickering fire and heavy air, felt like a stage where each actor played their part with calculated precision. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing near the window, watched the rain lash the glass, his mind racing to keep up with Poirot's methodical probing. The discovery of the IV monogram on the handkerchief, letter opener, and note had cast a shadow over the group, and now a new name, Anthony Vaughan, hung in the air like a specter. Poirot, seated in a high-backed chair, his hands folded neatly over his cane, surveyed the guests with his piercing green eyes. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. The threads of this mystery begin to form a pattern, but it is not yet complete. The initials AV, they appear too often to be coincidence, yet they are too obvious to be the whole truth. Someone wishes us to believe in a simple solution, but I, Hercule Poirot, do not trust simplicity in matters of murder. Sergeant Brooks, stationed by the door, shifted uncomfortably. His earlier confidence in a straightforward case had waned under Poirot's relentless scrutiny. "We've sent a wire to London about this Anthony Vaughan," he said, clutching his notebook. "The hotel's records show he stayed here 3 weeks ago, left after 2 nights. No trouble, paid his bill. But we'll track him down." Poirot nodded, though his expression suggested little faith in this lead. "Bon, Sergeant. But let us not fix our gaze too firmly on Monsieur Vaughan. A name in a ledger is not a confession." He turned to the guests, his mustache twitching slightly. "Let us consider the moment of the crime. Mademoiselle Henshaw was lured to the library at 7:45, as the note suggests. Who among you had the opportunity to deliver this note?" Lady Eleanor Marwood, her silver hair catching the firelight, spoke first, her tone icy. "I was in the dining room with Mr. Whitmore, as I've said. I saw no note, and I certainly didn't deliver one." Mr. Gerald Whitmore nodded vigorously, his spectacles slipping. Quite right. We were discussing investments, bonds, you know." Never left the table until the scream. Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Maurice Langston, whose brooding silence seemed to deepen. "And you, Doctor? You were in the hallway retrieving your cigar. Did you see Mademoiselle Henshaw or anyone near the library?" Langston's jaw tightened, his eyes meeting Poirot's briefly before dropping to the floor. "I saw no one. The hall was empty. I was near my room, as I said, when the scream came." Poirot tilted his head, his voice soft but probing. "And yet the library is but a few steps from the hall. A man with your alertness, Docteur, might have noticed something, a shadow, a sound." Langston's fingers twitched, but he shook his head. "Nothing. It all happened so quickly." Mr. Rupert Grayson, the hotel's proprietor, cleared his throat. "Monsieur Poirot, my wife and I were clearing the table with the maids. We didn't see Miss Henshaw after she left the dining room. The note, well, anyone could have slipped it to her earlier in the day." Mrs. Beatrice Grayson nodded, her face pale. "She was in the library all afternoon writing. I thought she was working on her novel. She mentioned wanting to be an author." Poirot's eyes gleamed at this. "A novel, you say? Interesting. Did she share its contents, madame?" Mrs. Grayson shook her head. "No, she was private about it. Said it was just a draft, nothing ready to show." Poirot leaned back, his fingers drumming lightly on his cane. "Bon. Let us return to the library, Hastings. There is more to learn there." The library, now dim and somber under the weight of tragedy, seemed to hold secrets in its very walls. Clara's body had been removed, but the blood-stained rug remained, a grim reminder of the crime. Poirot moved to the desk, where the half-finished letter to my dearest E lay undisturbed. He studied it again, his brow furrowed. "This letter, Hastings, it is a puzzle within a puzzle. Why write it here in a public room? And this ink smudge on her left hand when she was right-handed, it does not fit." Hastings, peering over Poirot's shoulder, said, "Could she have been ambidextrous? Or perhaps she smudged it accidentally?" Poirot shook his head. "Non, mon ami. The smudge is deliberate, or at least significant. And this letter, it speaks of the sea, the cliffs, but nothing of urgency." Yet the note with its urgent meeting suggests otherwise. He produced the monogrammed note, its AV initials stark against the cream paper. This was written in a different hand, Hastings. The ink is darker, the pen heavier. Two writers, two purposes. Hastings' eyes widened. You mean the note and the letter aren't connected? Poirot smiled faintly. They are connected, but not as we first thought. The note lured her to her death, but the letter, it may tell us why she was a target. They moved to the bookshelf where Poirot had found the Devonshire history book. He opened it again, flipping to a marked page about the Crestwell family. A passage described a scandal in the 1890s. A Crestwell daughter, Amelia Vaughan, had eloped with a man against her family's wishes, disappearing from the village. The initials A.V. leaped from the page. "Good Lord, Poirot!" Hastings exclaimed. Amelia Vaughan. Could she be our A.V.? Poirot's mustache twitched. A possibility, Hastings, but an old one. Amelia Vaughan would be long gone, perhaps dead. But her initials, they linger here, in this hotel, in this crime. He closed the book, his mind clearly racing. We must speak to the staff again. The maids, the cook. They see things the guests do not. In the kitchen, Jenny and Rose, the maids, were washing dishes, their faces drawn with worry. Mrs. Pollard, the cook, stood nearby, her hands flour-stained. Poirot questioned them gently but firmly. Did Mademoiselle Henshaw receive any letters or visitors in the past few days? Jenny hesitated, then said, She got a letter yesterday morning, sir. It came by post, no return address. She read it in the library and seemed upset, but she didn't say why. Poirot's eyes narrowed. And this letter, where is it now? Rose spoke up. She burned it, sir. I saw her toss it into the library fire yesterday afternoon. Poirot nodded, undeterred. Merci. And the study. Did you see anyone there today? Both maids shook their heads, but Mrs. Pollard said, Mr. Whitmore was in there this morning looking at some old maps. Said he was researching for a friend. Back in the drawing room, Poirot faced the guests once more. A letter was burned, a note was delivered, and a letter opener was taken. These are not random acts. Someone among you knows more than they say. The guests shifted uncomfortably, their alibis holding but their secrets simmering. Sergeant Brooks, eager to pin the crime on Anthony Vaughan, pressed Poirot. This Vaughan fellow, he's our man, isn't he? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. A red herring, Sergeant, is only as good as the net that catches it. We shall see. The storm roared on, and Hastings felt the mystery tightening like a noose. Poirot's little gray cells were weaving a trap, and the truth was closer than ever. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The storm over Crestwell-on-Sea showed no signs of abating, its relentless howl a fitting backdrop to the mounting tension within Crestwell Manor Hotel. The drawing room, with its flickering fire and heavy drapes, seemed to pulse with unspoken secrets as Hercule Poirot continued his meticulous investigation into the murder of Clara Henshaw. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing by the window, watched the rain streak the glass, his mind grappling with the tangle of clues. The monogrammed letter opener, the note, the burned letter, and now the shadow of Amelia Vaughan, a name from the hotel's distant past. Poirot, however, appeared unruffled, his green eyes gleaming with the quiet intensity of a man who saw order where others saw chaos. Poirot stood before the guests, his small frame commanding the room. Mesdames et messieurs, he said, his voice precise and measured, We have established the scene of the crime, the alibis, and the curious presence of the initials AV. But it is in the details, les petits détails, that the truth reveals itself. A gesture, a word, a moment out of place. These are the keys to unlocking this mystery. He turned to Sergeant Brooks, who clutched his notebook like a lifeline. Sergeant, you have examined the study. Tell me, was anything else amiss beyond the missing letter opener? Brooks frowned, flipping through his notes. Nothing obvious, sir. The desk tools were in their case, except for the one used in the crime. The room was tidy, no papers out of place, no signs of a struggle. Poirot's mustache twitched. Tidy, you say? Yet a letter opener, a valuable item, was taken unnoticed. Curious. He turned to the guests, his gaze settling on Mr. Gerald Whitmore, whose nervous fidgeting had not gone unnoticed. Monsieur Whitmore, Madame Pollard tells me you were in the study this morning examining maps. May I ask why? Whitmore's spectacles slipped down his nose and he pushed them back with a trembling hand. Oh, just a bit of research, Monsieur Poirot. A friend in London asked me to look into local history, old estates, that sort of thing. I thought the study might have some useful maps. Poirot tilted his head, his eyes narrowing. And did you find what you sought? Whitmore hesitated, his florid waistcoat seeming to tighten around him. Not really. Just some old surveys of the Crestwell estate, nothing important. Bon, Poirot said, though his tone suggested skepticism. And did you notice the desk tools during your visit? The letter opener, perhaps? Whitmore shook his head vigorously. No, sir. I didn't touch the desk. I was only there a few minutes. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable, and turned to Lady Eleanor Marwood. Madame, you mentioned Mademoiselle Henshaw's interest in a letter she expected. Did you see her receive it yesterday? Lady Marwood's lips pursed, her emerald brooch glinting as she shifted in her seat. I saw her take a letter from the hall table after breakfast. She read it quickly and looked unsettled. I assumed it was personal, as I said. And you did not ask her about it? Poirot pressed. Lady Marwood's eyes met his, steady but guarded. It was not my place. She was a private young woman. Poirot's gaze lingered, then moved to Dr. Maurice Langston, whose brooding silence seemed to deepen with each question. Doctor, you prescribed a sedative for Mademoiselle Henshaw. Did you see her after that consultation? Perhaps in the library where she spent so much time. Langston's brow furrowed, his voice low. No, Monsieur Poirot. I saw her only at meals after that. She seemed quieter than usual, but I attributed it to her nerves. Poirot nodded, then gestured to Hastings. Come, mon ami. Let us return to the library. There is a detail that eludes us, and I must find it. The library, now lit by a single lamp, felt colder, its shadows deeper. The blood-stained rug had been removed, but the desk remained as Clara had left it. The half-finished letter to my dearest E, a silent witness to her final moments. Poirot knelt by the desk, his gloved fingers tracing the edge of the paper. This ink smudge, Hastings, he said, his voice almost a whisper. It is not random. Regardez, the smudge is on her left hand, yet the letter is written with her right. And the paper, it is slightly creased, as if pressed against something. Hastings peered over his shoulder. Pressed? You mean she was hiding it? Perhaps, Poirot said, lifting the letter to the light. Or perhaps it was moved after her death. The crease, it is not natural for a letter left in mid-sentence. He set the paper down and examined the desk's surface. his fingers pausing over a faint scratch near the edge. Curieux. This mark, it is fresh, Hastings. A small thing, but significant. He moved to the candelabrum, its wax drippings hardened on the desk. The candles were lit when we found her, no? Yet the room was not dark at 7:45. Why light candles so early? Hastings frowned, trying to follow Poirot's logic. Perhaps she liked the ambiance. Or could someone else have lit them? Poirot's eyes gleamed. Exactement, mon ami. The candles, the scratch, the smudge, these are not accidents. They tell a story. He crossed to the bookshelf where the Devonshire history book still lay. Opening it, he reread the passage about Amelia Vaughan, the Crestwell daughter who had eloped decades ago. This Amelia Vaughan, he murmured. Her initials haunt this case, yet she is long gone. Why do they appear now? Hastings ventured. Could someone be using her initials deliberately? To throw us off? Poirot nodded. A red herring, perhaps, but one with purpose. We must learn more about Mademoiselle Henshaw's connection to this place. He turned to the door where Sergeant Brooks appeared, his face flushed with news. Sir, Brooks said, we've had a reply from London about Anthony Vaughan. He's a businessman, lives in Mayfair, says he was here 3 weeks ago for a fishing trip, but he's been in London ever since. His housekeeper confirms it. Poirot's mustache twitched. An alibi, Sergeant? We shall see, but for now let us focus on the library. The candles, the scratch, the letter, they speak to us if we listen. He returned to the desk, his fingers brushing the scratch again. This mark, he said, it is not from the letter opener. It is too fine, too precise. Perhaps a ring or a watch pressed against the wood. He looked up at Hastings, his eyes alight. We must examine the guest's possessions. A small detail, but it may lead us to the truth. Back in the drawing room, Poirot addressed the guests with renewed intensity. Mes amis, a new clue has emerged. A scratch on the desk, a mark left by the killer, perhaps. I ask you now, do any of you wear a ring or watch that might leave such a mark? The guests exchanged uneasy glances. Lady Marwood touched her brooch but said nothing. Whitmore's hands were bare save for his spectacles. Langston wore a simple gold watch which he displayed with a frown. This? It's plain, no sharp edges. Poirot nodded, his smile enigmatic. Merci. We shall continue our inquiries. The truth, it is close, but it requires patience. As the guests dispersed, Hastings leaned close. Poirot, that scratch. Do you really think it's significant? Poirot's eyes twinkled. Every detail, mon ami, is significant when it does not belong. The little gray cells, they are working, and soon the puzzle will take shape. The storm roared on, and Hastings felt the net tightening, the truth just out of reach but drawing ever closer. Chapter 7. More lies surface. The storm's fury had not abated, its relentless assault on Crestwell Manor Hotel mirroring the growing unrest within its walls. The drawing room, with its heavy drapes and flickering fire, seemed to close in around the guests, each of whom bore the weight of Hercule Poirot's unrelenting scrutiny. Captain Arthur Hastings stood near the door, his eyes scanning the faces of Lady Eleanor Marwood, Mr. Gerald Whitmore, Dr. Morris Langston, and Mr. and Mrs. Grayson. The discovery of the scratch on the library desk, the monogram note, and the burned letter had deepened the mystery. and Poirot's calm demeanor only heightened the tension. Hastings knew that beneath the detective's polished exterior, the little gray cells were piecing together a puzzle that grew more intricate with each revelation. Poirot stood by the fireplace, his cane resting lightly in his hands, his green eyes sharp and unyielding. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice cutting through the room's heavy silence. "The death of Mademoiselle Clara Henshaw is a tapestry woven with lies. Each of you has offered an alibi, a story. But the truth, it is like a shadow, fleeting and elusive. Tonight we shall uncover more of this shadow, for secrets they cannot remain hidden from Hercule Poirot." He turned to Lady Marwood, whose icy composure seemed to waver under his gaze. "Madam, you spoke of Mademoiselle Henshaw's anxiety over a letter. Yet you did not mention that you too received a letter yesterday morning delivered to the hall table. Is this not so?" Lady Marwood's hand tightened on her emerald brooch, her lips parting in surprise. "How did you—" "Yes, I received a letter, but it was a trivial matter, a note from a friend in London. It has no bearing on this tragedy." Poirot's mustache twitched, a sign of his skepticism. "Trivial, you say? Yet you did not mention it. May I see this letter, madam?" Lady Marwood's eyes narrowed, but she nodded. "It's in my room. I'll fetch it." She rose, her movements graceful but deliberate, and left the room under Sergeant Brooks's watchful eye. Poirot turned to Mr. Whitmore, whose nervous fidgeting had grown more pronounced. "Monsieur Whitmore, your interest in the Crestwell estate's history intrigues me. You say it was for a friend, yet Mademoiselle Henshaw asked you about the same subject. Did you discuss this with her in private, perhaps?" Whitmore's spectacles slipped, and he pushed them back with a trembling hand. "No, no, Monsieur Poirot. It was just that one conversation, as I said. She asked about the Crestwells, and I told her what I knew, nothing more." Poirot's gaze lingered, then shifted to Dr. Langston. "Doctor, you were in the hallway when the scream was heard, yet you saw no one. But tell me, did you hear anything before the scream? A footstep, a door closing?" Langston's brow furrowed, his voice low and strained. "It was quiet, Monsieur Poirot. The storm was loud, but I heard nothing unusual until the scream." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. "And you, Monsieur and Madame Grayson, you were clearing the table. Yet the maids say you stepped into the hall briefly, Madame Grayson, just before the scream. Why?" Mrs. Grayson's face paled, her hand clutching her husband's arm. I went to fetch a clean cloth from the linen cupboard. It was only a moment." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A moment, madame, can be enough." "And you saw no one?" "No one," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Lady Marwood returned, holding a folded letter which she handed to Poirot with a look of defiance. "Here it is, Monsieur Poirot. As I said, it's nothing of importance." Poirot unfolded the letter, his eyes scanning the elegant script. It was addressed to Lady Marwood and signed by a Margaret discussing a charity event in London. But Poirot's attention lingered on the envelope, which bore a faint smudge of ink on its edge. "Curieux," he murmured. "This ink, it is similar to that on Mademoiselle Henshaw's hand. And the smudge, almost identical." Lady Marwood's composure faltered. "That's impossible. I received it yesterday, as I said. I don't know anything about ink smudges." Poirot tucked the letter into his pocket. "We shall see, madame. For now, let us return to the library. Hastings, you will accompany me." The library, now shrouded in shadow, felt like a crypt, its silence broken only by the storm's distant rumble. Poirot moved to the desk, where the half-finished letter to my dearest E still lay. He lifted it, comparing it to Lady Marwood's letter. The ink, Hastings, it is the same, and the smudge, it is not accidental. Someone handled these papers with care, yet left a mark. Hastings frowned, struggling to follow. You think Lady Marwood's letter is connected to Clara's? Poirot nodded. It is possible, but we must consider another detail. The scratch on the desk. It suggests something was pressed against it, perhaps in haste. He knelt, examining the scratch again, his gloved fingers tracing its fine line. A ring, a watch, or perhaps a key. He rose, crossing to the bookshelf where the Devonshire history book had yielded the monogrammed note. He flipped through it again, pausing at a passage about Amelia Vaughan's elopement. This Amelia Vaughan, he said. Her story is tied to this manor, to its secrets. But why does it surface now in this crime? Hastings ventured. Could Clara have been researching the Crestwells? Maybe she uncovered something dangerous? Poirot's eyes sparkled. A good thought, mon ami. Mademoiselle Henshaw was no idle tourist. Her questions, her letter, her time in the library, they suggest a purpose. He moved to the fireplace where the ashes of Clara's burned letter lay. Kneeling, he sifted through them with a small tool, uncovering a fragment of paper with a single word. Inheritance. Mon Dieu, Poirot murmured. This word, it changes everything. An inheritance, a motive as old as time. They returned to the drawing room where the guests sat in uneasy silence. Poirot held up the fragment of ash. Mes amis, a piece of Mademoiselle Henshaw's burned letter has revealed a clue. The word inheritance. Does this stir any memories? The room grew still, the air thick with tension. Lady Marwood's hand froze on her brooch. Whitmore's spectacles slipped entirely, clattering to the floor. Langston's jaw tightened, and Mrs. Grayson let out a small gasp. Mr. Grayson spoke first, his voice strained. Inheritance? Clara never mentioned anything like that. Poirot's smile was enigmatic. Yet it was important enough to burn. Someone wished to hide it. He turned to Lady Marwood. Madame, your letter, did it mention an inheritance, perhaps connected to the Crestwells? Lady Marwood's eyes flashed. I told you it was about a charity event, nothing more. Poirot nodded, undeterred. We shall see. The truth, it is like the storm outside. It cannot be silenced forever. As the guests dispersed, Hastings leaned close. Poirot, this inheritance business, it's a motive, isn't it? Someone wanted to stop Clara from uncovering it. Poirot's eyes twinkled. Oui, mon ami. The lies, they surface and the net tightens. We are close, but we must tread carefully. The storm roared on, and Hastings felt the mystery's threads drawing tighter, the truth lurking just beyond the shadows. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The storm over Crestwell-on-Sea had reached a fever pitch, its howling winds and crashing waves a relentless chorus to the mounting drama within Crestwell Manor Hotel. The drawing room, with its dim firelight and oppressive air, seemed to close in around the guests, each of whom bore the weight of Hercule Poirot's unrelenting pursuit of the truth. Captain Arthur Hastings stood near the window, his heart pounding as he sensed the investigation nearing a critical juncture. The eyes, fragment of Clara Henshaw's burned letter bearing the word inheritance. had cast a new light on the murder, and Poirot's calm exterior belied the intensity of his little gray cells at work. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small frame commanding attention, his green eyes gleaming with purpose. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice steady but laced with a quiet urgency, "we stand at a crossroads in this affair. Mademoiselle Clara Henshaw was not a mere visitor to this hotel. Her presence, her questions, her death, they are tied to a secret, one that someone in this room sought to bury. The word inheritance was burned but not destroyed. It speaks of motive, of greed, of fear. And now I ask you to speak, to reveal what you have concealed." The guests sat in tense silence, their faces a study in guarded emotion. Lady Eleanor Marwood's fingers tightened on her emerald brooch, her composure strained. Mr. Gerald Whitmore fumbled with his spectacles, his florid waistcoat damp with perspiration. Dr. Maurice Langston stood by the mantel, his brooding silence heavier than ever, while Mr. and Mrs. Grayson sat close, her hand trembling in his. The weight of Poirot's words hung over them, and Hastings could feel the air crackling with unspoken truths. Poirot turned to Mrs. Beatrice Grayson, whose pale face betrayed her nerves. "Madam Grayson," he said gently, "you have been most helpful, yet I sense you know more than you have shared. You saw Mademoiselle Henshaw in the library often, writing, burning a letter. Did she ever speak of her purpose here?" Mrs. Grayson's eyes darted to her husband, then back to Poirot. She mentioned once that she was researching her family, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. She said she had a connection to Crestwell, something about her late father. I didn't pry, it wasn't my place. Poirot's mustache twitched, his gaze sharpening. Her father, you say? And did she mention a name or a specific connection? Mrs. Grayson hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. She said something about the Crestwell family, but it was vague. I thought she was just curious, like a writer gathering ideas. Poirot nodded, filing the detail away. Merci, madame. Your memory is most valuable. He turned to Doctor Langston, whose furrowed brow seemed etched in stone. Docteur, you prescribed a sedative for Mademoiselle Henshaw's sleeplessness. Did she mention this family connection, perhaps in her dreams or anxieties? Langston's jaw tightened, his voice low and strained. She spoke of dreams, yes, but nothing clear. She mentioned a name once, Amelia, but I thought it was just a nightmare, not a real person. The room stilled at the mention of Amelia, the name tied to the monogram A.V. Hastings caught his breath, glancing at Poirot, whose eyes gleamed with sudden intensity. Amelia, you say? Poirot repeated. And when did she mention this name? Langston shifted uncomfortably. 2 days ago during our consultation. She woke from a dream, muttering about Amelia and a promise broken. I didn't press her. She was upset. Poirot's gaze swept the room, lingering on Lady Marwood. Madam, you have lived in Devonshire for many years, non? The name Amelia Vaughan, it is familiar to you, perhaps. Lady Marwood's lips parted, her composure cracking for the first time. Amelia Vaughan, she said, her voice sharp. That old scandal? She was a Crestwell, ran off with some nobody decades ago. Everyone in the county knows the story. But what does it have to do with Clara? Poirot's smile was enigmatic. That, madame, is what we must discover. He turned to Mr. Whitmore, whose nervous fidgeting had reached a fever pitch. Monsieur Whitmore, your interest in the Crestwell estate, did it by chance involve Amelia Vaughan? Whitmore's spectacles slipped entirely, clattering to the floor. He stooped to retrieve them, his face flushed. "No, no, Monsieur Poirot. I was researching for a friend, as I said. Old maps, nothing more. I don't know anything about Amelia Vaughan." The room's tension snapped like a taut wire. Mrs. Grayson let out a sob, her hands covering her face. "Oh, Rupert, I can't bear it," she cried, turning to her husband. "I saw her. I saw Clara with that letter, and I didn't say anything. She was so afraid, and I thought it was nothing." Mr. Grayson's face paled, his arm tightening around his wife. "Beatrice, hush. You couldn't have known." Poirot stepped forward, his voice gentle but firm. "Madame Grayson, what did you see? Speak now, for the truth cannot wait." Mrs. Grayson's voice trembled as she spoke, her eyes brimming with tears. "Yesterday afternoon in the library, Clara was reading a letter. She looked terrified. I asked if she was all right, and she said it was a family matter, something about her father's will. She burned the letter right after in the fireplace. I should have told someone, but I thought it was private." Poirot's eyes softened, though his mind was clearly racing. "You have done well to tell me now, madame. This letter, it mentioned her father's will. Did she say anything else?" Mrs. Grayson shook her head, her voice breaking. "Only that she had to find the truth, no matter the cost. I thought she meant her novel, but now... Oh God, what if I could have stopped it?" The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the guests. Hastings felt a pang of sympathy for Mrs. Grayson, but Poirot's focus remained unwavering. "Merci, madame," he said. "Your courage has brought us closer to the truth." He turned to the group, his voice rising slightly. "An inheritance, a family secret, a name from the past. These are not mere coincidences. Mademoiselle Henshaw came to Crestwell for a reason, and someone ensured she would not leave with it. The initials AV, the burned letter, the note, they are pieces of a puzzle, and we are close to seeing its shape." Poirot paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "I ask you now, if there is more to share, do so before the net closes. The little gray cells, they do not rest, and the truth will not hide forever." Lady Marwood's voice cut through the silence, sharp and defiant. "This is absurd, Monsieur Poirot. You're chasing ghosts, Amelia Vaughan, inheritance nonsense. Clara was a silly girl who got herself into trouble. Perhaps this Anthony Vaughan is your killer, not one of us." Poirot's smile was faint but unyielding. "Madame, the ghosts of the past often cast long shadows. We shall see who stands in them." He gestured to Hastings. "Come, mon ami. The library calls us once more." In the library, Poirot knelt by the fireplace, sifting through the ashes again. He uncovered another fragment, this one bearing the words, "Crestwell Estate." "Mon Dieu," he murmured. "The puzzle grows clearer. Clara Henshaw was searching for something tied to the Crestwell family, perhaps her own inheritance." Hastings' eyes widened. "You think she was a Crestwell, a descendant of Amelia Vaughan?" Poirot nodded. "It is possible, Hastings. The initials, the history, the letter, they point to a connection. But who feared her discovery and why?" The storm roared on, its fury a mirror to the emotional tempest within the hotel. Hastings felt the weight of the moment, knowing that Poirot's trap was closing and someone's secrets were about to unravel. Chapter 9. The Trap. The storm over Crestwell-on-Sea battered the walls of Crestwell Manor Hotel, its howling winds and crashing waves a relentless reminder of the chaos lurking beneath the surface of the gathered guests. The drawing room, with its dim firelight and heavy air, felt like a pressure cooker. The tension among Lady Eleanor Marwood, Mr. Gerald Whitmore, Dr. Maurice Langston, and Mr. and Mrs. Grayson palpable. Captain Arthur Hastings stood near the door, his heart racing as he sensed Hercule Poirot was about to spring a trap. The revelation of Clara Henshaw's connection to the Crestwell family, the burned letter mentioning an inheritance, and the persistent shadow of the initials A.V. had brought the investigation to a boiling point. Poirot's calm exterior masked a mind that was closing in on the truth, and Hastings knew the next moments would be pivotal. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small frame radiating an almost theatrical authority. His green eyes gleamed with purpose, his mustache perfectly aligned as he clasped his cane. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice soft but commanding. "We have reached a moment of truth in the affair of Mademoiselle Clara Henshaw. The clues, the monogrammed note, the letter opener, the burned letter, the scratch on the desk, they form a pattern, a web of deceit. Tonight I, Hercule Poirot, will apply the pressure necessary to reveal the one who wove it." The guests shifted uneasily, their faces a mixture of dread and defiance. Lady Marwood's fingers tightened on her emerald brooch, her icy composure fraying at the edges. Whitmore's hands trembled, his spectacles fogging with nervous perspiration. Langston stood rigid by the mantel, his brooding silence almost defiant, while Mrs. Grayson clung to her husband's arm, her eyes wide with fear. Mr. Grayson's genial host's demeanor had vanished, replaced by a strained expression. Poirot paced slowly, his cane tapping lightly on the parquet floor. "Let us reconstruct the evening of the murder. At 7 o'clock you were all at dinner. Mademoiselle Henshaw excused herself at 10 minutes to 8, claiming a headache. At 5 minutes to 8, a scream was heard, and she was found dead in the library, stabbed with a monogrammed letter opener. The window was locked, the room undisturbed. Yet a note bearing the initials A.V. lured her to the library at 7:45. A letter she burned spoke of an inheritance, and her questions about the Crestwell family suggest a personal connection. Someone in this room knew her purpose and feared it. He stopped, his gaze sweeping the group. "I propose a simple exercise. Let us imagine the scene. Mademoiselle Henshaw enters the library expecting to meet someone. The candles are lit, though it is not yet dark. She sits at the desk, perhaps to continue her letter to my dearest E. The killer enters silently and strikes. But why the library? Why the letter opener, and why the monogram?" Lady Marwood spoke first, her voice sharp. "This is theatrical nonsense, Monsieur Poirot. You're suggesting one of us slipped away, stabbed her, and returned unnoticed? It's impossible. We were all accounted for." Poirot's smile was faint but unyielding. "Impossible, madame. No, the impossible is merely a matter of perspective. Let us test your alibis. Madame Grayson, you stepped into the hall to fetch a cloth just before the scream. You say you saw no one, yet the library door is visible from the linen cupboard. Did you truly see nothing?" Mrs. Grayson's face paled, her voice trembling. I was only gone a moment. The hall was empty, I swear." Poirot turned to Dr. Langston. "Doctor, you were in the hallway retrieving a cigar. You say you heard nothing until the scream, yet you were near the library. A man of your observation would notice a sound, a shadow, non? Langston's jaw tightened, his eyes dark. The storm was loud, Monsieur Poirot. I heard nothing until the scream. Poirot nodded, then faced Mr. Whitmore. Monsieur, your interest in the Crestwell estate aligns curiously with Mademoiselle Henshaw's questions. And you were in the study where the letter opener was kept only hours before the crime. Did you see it there? Whitmore's spectacles slipped, his voice rising. I told you I didn't touch the desk. I was looking at maps, nothing more. Poirot's gaze shifted to Lady Marwood. And you, madam, received a letter with an ink smudge, much like the one on Mademoiselle Henshaw's hand. A coincidence, perhaps, but I do not believe in coincidences. Lady Marwood's eyes flashed. I've shown you my letter. It's irrelevant. You're grasping at straws, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. Non, madame. I grasp at truth. Let us consider a new detail. The scratch on the desk, fine and precise, likely made by a ring or watch. I ask you now to show me your hands, your jewelry. The guests hesitated, exchanging glances. Lady Marwood extended her hands, revealing only her emerald brooch and a plain gold ring. Whitmore's hands were bare, his nervous fidgeting evident. Langston displayed his gold watch, its edges smooth and unremarkable. Mr. Grayson wore a signet ring, but its surface was rounded, unlikely to scratch. Mrs. Grayson, trembling, showed a thin silver bracelet too delicate for such a mark. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Curieux. The scratch remains a mystery, but it will not remain so for long. He paused, his voice dropping to a dramatic whisper. I believe the killer is in this room, and I believe they acted to protect a secret tied to the Crestwell estate. Mademoiselle Henshaw was no idle tourist. She came to uncover an inheritance, perhaps her own. Someone ensured she would not succeed. The room erupted in protest. Lady Marwood stood, her voice icy. This is outrageous. You accuse us without proof, Whitmore stammered. I had no reason to harm her. Langston's voice was low, almost menacing. You're fishing, Monsieur Poirot. You have nothing. Mrs. Grayson burst into tears, her words spilling out. I can't bear it. Clara was so young, so kind. If I'd known what that letter meant, I'd have stopped her. Poirot's gaze softened, but his resolve was unshaken. Madame, your distress is noted, but the truth requires more. I ask you all to remain here tonight. No one leaves the hotel until we speak again. He gestured to Hastings. Come, mon ami. The library holds one more secret. In the library, Poirot knelt by the desk, his gloved fingers tracing the scratch again. This mark, Hastings, it is the key. It was made in haste, perhaps as the killer leaned over the desk. He examined the candelabrum, noting the wax drippings. The candles were lit, yet the room was not dark. Why? Hastings ventured. To create an atmosphere, or to burn something? Poirot nodded. Perhaps both. The burned letter, the candles, the scratch. They are connected. He moved to the fireplace, sifting through the ashes once more. A tiny fragment caught his eye, bearing the word Amelia. Mon Dieu, he murmured. The name returns, always the name. Hastings' eyes widened. Amelia Vaughn again? But how does it fit? Poirot stood, his expression grave. Mademoiselle Henshaw was tracing her lineage, perhaps to claim an inheritance tied to Amelia Vaughn and the Crestwell estate. The killer knew this and acted to stop her. The monogram, the note. They are distractions, but the truth lies in the details. The storm roared outside, its fury a mirror to the trap Poirot was setting. Hastings felt the net closing, the truth tantalizingly close, as Poirot's little gray cells worked to unravel the final threads of the mystery. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The storm over Crestwell-on-Sea had settled into a brooding, relentless rhythm, its thunder echoing the tension within Crestwell Manor Hotel. The drawing room, with its dim firelight and heavy curtains, was a stage for the climactic act of Hercule Poirot's investigation into the murder of Clara Henshaw. Captain Arthur Hastings stood near the door, his pulse quickening as he sensed the moment of truth approaching. The clues, the monogrammed letter opener, the note, the burned letter, the scratch on the desk, and the persistent shadow of Amelia Vaughan had woven a complex web, and Poirot's little gray cells were ready to unravel it. The guests, seated in a tense semicircle, watched Poirot with a mixture of dread and anticipation, their alibis and secrets laid bare under his relentless scrutiny. Poirot stood at the center of the room, his small frame radiating an almost theatrical authority. His green eyes gleamed with certainty, his mustache perfectly aligned as he clasped his cane. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and commanding, "the time has come to reveal the truth behind the death of Mademoiselle Clara Henshaw. This is no ordinary crime, but a masterpiece of deception crafted to conceal a motive as old as time. Greed. I, Hercule Poirot, have pieced together the puzzle, and now I will show you how each clue fits." The guests sat frozen, their faces a study in strained emotion. Lady Eleanor Marwood's hand clutched her emerald brooch, her icy composure fraying. Mr. Gerald Whitmore's spectacles fogged with nervous perspiration, his hands trembling. Dr. Maurice Langston stood by the mantel, his brooding silence now tinged with unease. Mr. and Mrs. Grayson sat close, her eyes red-rimmed, his face pale but resolute. Sergeant Brooks, notebook in hand, hovered near the door, eager for the resolution of the case. Poirot paced slowly, his cane tapping lightly on the parquet floor. "Let us begin with the scene of the crime. Mademoiselle Clara Henshaw was found in the library at 5 minutes to 8, stabbed with a monogrammed letter opener bearing the initials AVA note, also monogrammed, lured her to the library at 7:45. A half-finished letter to my dearest E bore an ink smudge on her left hand, though she was right-handed. A scratch on the desk, the lit candles, the burned letter mentioning inheritance, and Amelia. These are not random, but pieces of a deliberate design." He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. Mademoiselle Henshaw came to Crestwell Manor not for a holiday, but to uncover a truth about her lineage. She was researching the Crestwell family, specifically Amelia Vaughan, who eloped decades ago, leaving behind a claim to the Crestwell estate. Clara believed she was a descendant entitled to an inheritance. This was her secret, and it was a threat to someone in this room. Poirot turned to Lady Marwood, his voice gentle but probing. "Madame, you have lived in Devonshire for many years. You knew of Amelia Vaughan's scandal, yet you did not mention that your late husband, Lord Marwood, was a distant cousin of the Crestwells. This estate, its wealth, it was once tied to your family, no?" Lady Marwood's lips parted, her voice sharp. "That's ancient history, Monsieur Poirot. My husband's family had no claim to this manor. It was sold long before we married." Poirot nodded, undeterred. "Perhaps, but the possibility of a claim, however faint, would stir unease, especially if a young woman like Clara began asking questions." He turned to Mr. Whitmore. "Monsieur, Your research into the Crestwell estate was no coincidence. You were seen in the study near the desk where the letter opener was kept. You claimed it was for a friend, but I suspect it was for yourself to ensure no one else uncovered what Clara sought. Whitmore's spectacles slipped, his voice rising. That's preposterous. I had no motive, no reason to harm her. Poirot's gaze shifted to Dr. Langston. Doctor, you prescribed a sedative for Clara's sleeplessness, yet you heard her mention Amelia in her dreams. You were in the hallway at the time of the scream, close to the library. A man of your precision could move swiftly, silently. Langston's jaw tightened, his voice low. I'm a doctor, not a murderer. I had no quarrel with her. Poirot smiled faintly. And yet someone did. He turned to Mrs. Grayson, whose tears had dried, replaced by a quiet dread. Madame, you saw Clara burn a letter, terrified by its contents. You heard her speak of her father's will, of finding the truth. You knew more than you admitted, no? Mrs. Grayson's voice trembled. I told you everything. I didn't know it would lead to this. Poirot raised a hand, silencing the room. Let us reconstruct the crime. Clara received a letter yesterday warning her of danger or revealing her inheritance. She burned it, fearing exposure. She was lured to the library by a note written by the killer bearing the initials AV to mislead us. The candles were lit to create an illusion of calm, but the killer struck swiftly, using the letter opener stolen from the study. The scratch on the desk was made by a ring worn by the killer. He paused, his eyes locking onto Mr. Grayson. Monsieur Grayson, you wear a signet ring, but it is smooth, unlikely to scratch. Yet you, as the hotel's proprietor, had access to the study, the library, and Clara's movements. You knew of her questions about the Crestwells, and you feared her claim could threaten your ownership of this manor built on the old Crestwell estate. Mr. Grayson's face paled, his voice hoarse. That's absurd. This hotel is mine, bought legally years ago. Poirot's voice grew sharper. Bought, yes, but with whispers of an unresolved claim. Clara's research threatened to unearth it. You slipped into the library after dinner, using the note to lure her. You struck, then returned to the dining room, your wife covering your brief absence. Mrs. Grayson gasped, her hands covering her face. No, Rupert, tell him it's not true. Mr. Grayson stood, his face contorted with anger. This is madness. I was clearing the table with Beatrice. Poirot's eyes gleamed. But you stepped into the hall, no? Just long enough to deliver the note and act. The ink smudge on Clara's hand, it came from the note, not her letter. You wrote it using an old monogram from the hotel's past to cast suspicion elsewhere. The room erupted in chaos, Lady Marwood protesting, Whitmore stammering, Langston staring in silence. Mrs. Grayson sobbed, her voice breaking. Rupert, please tell them. Mr. Grayson's shoulders slumped, his voice barely a whisper. I only wanted to protect what's ours. She was going to take it all. Our home, our livelihood. I didn't mean to kill her. It was an impulse. Poirot nodded, his expression somber. The impulse of fear, monsieur. But murder is never an impulse. It is a choice. Sergeant Brooks stepped forward, his face grim. Rupert Grayson, you're under arrest. As Grayson was led away, the room fell silent, the storm's roar the only sound. Hastings looked at Poirot, awe and sadness mingling. You knew, didn't you? The scratch, the note, it all pointed to him. Poirot's eyes softened. The little gray cells, mon ami, they see what others miss. The truth was there, in the details. The storm raged on, but the mystery was solved, its secrets laid bare in the flickering light of Crestwell Manor. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The storm over Crestwell-on-Sea had finally begun to wane. Its thunder reduced to a low grumble, the rain now a soft patter against the windows of Crestwell Manor Hotel. The drawing-room, though still lit by the dim glow of the fire, felt lighter, as if the revelation of Rupert Grayson's guilt had lifted a suffocating veil. The remaining guests, Lady Eleanor Marwood, Mr. Gerald Whitmore, Dr. Maurice Langston, and Mrs. Beatrice Grayson, sat in stunned silence, their faces etched with a mixture of relief, guilt, and sorrow. Captain Arthur Hastings stood near the door, his mind reeling from Poirot's masterful unraveling of the murder of Clara Henshaw. The little Belgian detective, Hercule Poirot, stood by the fireplace, his cane resting lightly in his hands, his green eyes reflecting a quiet melancholy. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice soft but resonant, "the tragedy of Mademoiselle Clara Henshaw is resolved, yet it leaves us with much to reflect upon. The human heart, it is a complex thing, driven by fear, by greed, by the desire to protect what one holds dear. Monsieur Grayson, he chose a path of darkness to preserve his world, but in doing so he destroyed another. This is the lesson we must carry forward." Hastings, watching Poirot closely, recognized the familiar tone of philosophical reflection that often followed the resolution of a case. Poirot's little gray cells had triumphed, but the victory was tinged with sorrow, as it so often was. The guests, still grappling with the shock of Grayson's confession, listened intently, their earlier defensiveness replaced by a somber introspection. Poirot turned to Mrs. Grayson, whose tear-streaked face betrayed her anguish. "Madame," he said gently, "your loyalty to your husband is commendable, but it blinded you to his actions. You saw Mademoiselle Henshaw's fear, yet you did not act. Why?" Mrs. Grayson's voice trembled, her hands twisting in her lap. I couldn't believe Rupert would do such a thing. I thought Clara's fear was about her novel, her imagination. I never dreamed." Her voice broke, and she buried her face in her hands. Poirot nodded, his expression one of compassion. "The heart. It protects those we love, even when the truth stands before us. You are not to blame, madame, but you must learn to see clearly." He turned to Lady Marwood, whose icy composure had softened, her emerald brooch now seeming a heavy burden. "Madam, your knowledge of the Crestwell family was a key to this puzzle, yet you withheld it, perhaps to protect your own family's name. Why?" Lady Marwood's lips tightened, but her voice was steady. "The Crestwells are a distant connection, Monsieur Poirot. I saw no need to drag old scandals into this. I had no part in Clara's death." Poirot's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Non, madame, you did not. But silence, it can be as dangerous as a lie. The truth requires courage, always." He moved to Mr. Whitmore, whose nervous fidgeting had subsided, replaced by a weary resignation. "Monsieur, your interest in the Crestwell estate was no mere coincidence, was it? You knew of Clara's inquiries, and you feared what she might uncover." Whitmore's spectacles fogged slightly, his voice low. I was curious, yes. My friend in London asked about the estate, and I wondered if Clara's questions were related. But I swear I meant her no harm." Poirot nodded. Curiosity, it is a powerful force, but it must be tempered with wisdom. You are fortunate, monsieur, that your curiosity did not lead you further astray. Finally, Poirot faced Dr. Langston, whose brooding silence had given way to a quiet intensity. Docteur, you heard Mademoiselle Henshaw speak of Amelia in her dreams, yet you did not press her. Your restraint, it was professional, but perhaps it cost her a chance to confide. Langston's jaw tightened, his eyes meeting Poirot's. I'm a doctor, not a detective. I thought her dreams were just that, dreams. If I'd known. He trailed off, his voice heavy with regret. Poirot's gaze softened. Regret, it is a heavy burden, docteur. But you acted as you thought best. The truth, it is not always ours to see. He stepped back, addressing the group as a whole. This case, it is a reminder that the past, it never truly leaves us. Amelia Vaughan's story, her elopement, her claim to the Crestwell estate, it lingered in the shadows, waiting to be uncovered. Mademoiselle Henshaw, she sought the truth of her heritage, and for that she paid with her life. Monsieur Grayson, fearing the loss of his hotel, his home, chose murder to silence her. The monogram, the note, the letter opener, they were tools of deception designed to mislead. But the little gray cells, they see through such tricks. Hastings, standing by the door, felt a pang of admiration for Poirot's clarity. You saw it all, Poirot, he said quietly. The scratch, the ink smudge, the candles, every detail led to Grayson. Poirot's eyes twinkled, though his expression remained somber. Oui, mon ami, the details, they are the map to the truth. The scratch on the desk made by Grayson's signet ring as he leaned to strike, the ink smudge from the note he wrote to lure Clara, the candles, lit to create a false calm. These were the threads I followed. And the burned letter with its talk of inheritance revealed the motive. Sergeant Brooks, who had been listening intently, stepped forward. You've done a fine job, Mr. Poirot. Grayson's in custody, and we'll have his confession sorted by morning. But what about this Anthony Vaughan fellow? Was he just a red herring? Poirot nodded. Oui, Sergeant. Anthony Vaughan, a guest from weeks past, left his monogrammed handkerchief behind, a convenient tool for Grayson to use. He planted it, and the letter opener to cast suspicion elsewhere. But the truth, it cannot be hidden from Hercule Poirot. The guests sat in silence, absorbing the weight of the resolution. Lady Marwood spoke at last, her voice softer than before. You've given us justice, Monsieur Poirot, but at what cost? Clara is gone, and this place, it will never be the same. Poirot inclined his head. Justice, madame, is never without cost, but it restores order, and that is the purpose of my work. He turned to Hastings, his voice low. Come, mon ami. Our work here is done. Let us leave these good people to their reflections. As they stepped into the hall, the storm's last echoes fading, Hastings felt a sense of closure, tempered by the tragedy of Clara's death. You always find the truth, Poirot, he said, but it's never easy, is it? Poirot's smile was wistful. No, Hastings. The truth, it is a heavy thing, but it is my duty, and I carry it with pride. They walked toward their rooms, the hotel's corridors quiet now. The mystery solved, but its shadows lingering. Poirot paused at the staircase, his eyes distant. The little gray cells, they rest now, but they are always ready for the next challenge. The night was calm at last, and Crestwell Manor Hotel stood silent, its secrets laid bare by the brilliance of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 12. The unseen threads. The morning after the revelation of Rupert Grayson's guilt dawned over Crestwell-on-Sea with a tentative calm, the storm having exhausted itself in the night. The sea beyond the cliffs sparkled under a pale sun, and Crestwell Manor Hotel, though still steeped in the shadow of tragedy, seemed to breathe a little easier. The guests, Lady Eleanor Marwood, Mr. Gerald Whitmore, Dr. Maurice Langston, and Mrs. Beatrice Grayson, had dispersed to their rooms or the dining hall, their faces marked by the strain of the previous evening. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing at the window of the hotel's lounge, gazed out at the horizon, his mind still tangled in the intricate web of clues that Hercule Poirot had so masterfully unraveled. The little Belgian detective, impeccable as ever in his black suit and polished shoes, sat nearby, sipping a tisane and studying a small notebook with an air of quiet satisfaction. "Poirot," Hastings ventured, turning from the window. "You've solved the case, but I can't help feeling there's more to it. Grayson's confession tied up the murder, but what about Clara's letter to E. and the Crestwell inheritance? It feels unfinished." Poirot's green eyes twinkled, his mustache curving slightly. "Mon ami, you are perceptive to sense the unseen threads. A case, it is like a tapestry. Some threads are bold, others hidden, but all are necessary for the whole. Monsieur Grayson's guilt is certain, but the story of Mademoiselle Henshaw, it has layers we have yet to fully explore." He set down his tisane, his fingers tapping lightly on the notebook. "Let us consider what we know. Clara Henshaw came to Crestwell to trace her lineage. Believing herself a descendant of Amelia Vaughan, whose elopement left a potential claim to the Crestwell estate. Grayson, fearing this claim would threaten his ownership of the hotel, killed her to silence her. The monogrammed letter opener, the note, the handkerchief, these were his tools of deception designed to point to a fictitious A.V., but the letter to my dearest E, it remains a mystery. Who is this E, and why was the letter left unfinished?" Hastings frowned, settling into a chair opposite Poirot. "You think there's someone else involved? Someone we haven't considered?" Poirot nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It is possible, Hastings. The letter, it was personal, intimate. Clara wrote it in the library, not her room, suggesting urgency or secrecy. And the ink smudge on her left hand when she was right-handed. It is a detail that nags at the little gray cells." He opened his notebook, revealing a sketch of the library desk, complete with the position of the letter, the candelabrum, and the scratch. "This scratch," he said, pointing to the drawing, "it was made by Grayson's signet ring, oui, but it is too precise for a mere accident. It suggests a deliberate act, perhaps to distract from another clue. And the candles lit when they were not needed, why?" Hastings leaned forward, intrigued. "You think Grayson was covering something else? Another person's involvement?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Not necessarily another killer, mon ami, but another presence. Let us visit the library once more. The answers, they are there, waiting." The library, bathed in the soft light of morning, felt less oppressive than it had in the storm's shadow. The blood-stained rug was gone, the desk tidied, but the half-finished letter to my dearest E remained under Sergeant Brooke's guard. Poirot knelt by the desk, his gloved fingers tracing the scratch again. "This mark," he murmured, "it is not just a ring. It is a message, a sign of haste. And the letter?" He lifted the paper, holding it to the light. the crease, it is not from writing but from being pressed, perhaps hidden beneath something. He moved to the bookshelf where the Devonshire history book still lay. Flipping through it, he paused at a page marked with a faint pencil line, describing Amelia Vaughan's elopement with a man named Edward Henshaw. "Regardez, Hastings," Poirot said, his voice low. "Edward Henshaw, Clara's father, perhaps. If so, she was indeed a Crestwell descendant with a claim to this estate." Hastings' eyes widened. "Good Lord, Poirot, that's why she was here. But who is E? Edward?" Poirot shook his head. "Non, Edward Henshaw is long dead, according to the records. But this E, it could be someone close to Clara, someone she trusted. We must speak to the staff again." In the kitchen, the maids, Jenny and Rose, were polishing silver, their faces drawn but cooperative. Poirot questioned them gently. "Mademoiselle, did Mademoiselle Henshaw ever mention a friend or relative, perhaps someone with the initial E?" Jenny hesitated, then said, "She spoke of an aunt once, sir. Evelyn, I think. Said she was writing to her about family matters. I overheard her in the library the day before she died." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Evelyn. Bon. And did she receive any letters from this Evelyn?" Rose nodded. "There was one, sir, 2 days ago. She read it and looked upset, then burned it. I told you about that." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Merci. You have been most helpful." Back in the lounge, Poirot shared his findings with Hastings. Evelyn, an aunt, perhaps the E of the letter. Clara was writing to her, seeking confirmation of her lineage. The burned letter. It may have contained proof or a warning. Grayson, he saw her inquiries as a threat. But there is more. The letter to Evelyn was left unfinished, suggesting Clara was interrupted, not just by the killer, but by her own discovery. Hastings frowned. "You mean she found something in the library? Something that made her stop writing?" Poirot nodded. "Exactement. The history book, the marked page, it was no accident. Clara was close to proving her claim. Grayson acted to stop her, but the letter to Evelyn, it may hold the final piece of the puzzle." He turned to Sergeant Brooks, who had joined them. "Sergeant, I request a search of Clara's room. There may be another letter or a journal that speaks of Evelyn." Brooks nodded, dispatching a constable to Clara's suite. Within the hour, they returned with a small leather-bound journal, its pages filled with Clara's neat script. Poirot flipped through it, pausing at an entry dated 2 days before her death. "Aunt Evelyn writes that the Crestwell claim is real. Father was Edward Henshaw, Amelia's son. The estate is rightfully ours, but I fear someone knows. I must be careful." Poirot closed the journal, his expression somber. "The truth, Hastings. Clara was on the verge of reclaiming her heritage. Grayson, he acted out of fear, but the letter to Evelyn, it was her lifeline cut short by murder." Hastings felt a pang of sadness. Poor girl, she was so close. Poirot nodded. "Oui, but her truth lives on. We will ensure Evelyn knows and the claim is honored." As they prepared to leave the lounge, Poirot paused, his eyes distant. "The unseen threads, Hastings. They bind us all. Clara's story, it is a reminder that the past, it always finds a way to the present." The sun rose higher over Crestwell-on-Sea, and the hotel stood quiet, its secrets revealed but its wounds still fresh. Poirot's work was not yet done, but the path to justice was clear. Chapter 13. The Echoes of Truth. The pale sun of Crestwell-on-Sea cast a tentative glow over the cliffs, its light filtering through the tall windows of Crestwell Manor Hotel. The air within the hotel, though still heavy with the aftermath of Rupert Grayson's confession, carried a sense of resolution, as if the truth had swept away the darkest shadows of the storm. Captain Arthur Hastings sat in the lounge, his gaze fixed on the sea, his mind replaying the intricate dance of clues that Hercule Poirot had orchestrated to unmask Clara Henshaw's killer. The discovery of Clara's journal, with its mention of her Aunt Evelyn and the Crestwell inheritance, had added a poignant layer to the tragedy, and Hastings felt the weight of a young woman's lost dreams. Poirot, seated opposite, sipped his tisane with his usual composure, his green eyes reflecting a quiet satisfaction tempered by melancholy. "Poirot," Hastings said, breaking the silence, "you've solved the murder, but this business with Clara's Aunt Evelyn, it feels like there's more to do. Will her claim to the Crestwell estate be honored now?" Poirot set down his cup, his mustache twitching slightly. "Mon ami, the pursuit of justice is not merely to catch the guilty, but to restore what has been taken. Mademoiselle Clara's quest was to reclaim her heritage, and though her life was stolen, her truth remains. We must ensure it reaches those who can act upon it." He opened Clara's journal, its pages worn from her careful hands, and reread the entry about Evelyn. This Aunt Evelyn, she was Clara's confidant, the one to whom she wrote her final letter. The burned letter, the unfinished one to "My dearest E." They were cries for help, for validation. We must find Evelyn and deliver Clara's truth. Hastings nodded, though a question nagged at him. But what about the monogram, Poirot? The AV initials, they were Grayson's misdirection, but why choose Amelia Vaughan's initials? Was it just convenience? Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Nah, Hastings, nothing in this case is mere convenience. Grayson used the monogram to point to a ghost, Amelia Vaughan, knowing it would distract us, but the choice was deliberate. He knew of the Crestwell scandal, perhaps from hotel records or local gossip, and used it to cast suspicion on a long-gone figure. Yet in doing so, he unwittingly pointed to Clara's true purpose." Poirot rose, his cane tapping lightly as he crossed to the window. "Let us walk the grounds, mon ami. The air, it clears the mind, and there are still threads to tie." The hotel's gardens, damp from the night's storm, stretched toward the cliffs, their neatly trimmed hedges and rose beds a stark contrast to the wild sea beyond. Poirot moved with purpose, his eyes scanning the path as if it held secrets of its own. The library, the study, the journal, these are the heart of the case, but the grounds, they tell us something of the hotel's history. This was once the Crestwell estate, and its past lingers. They paused by a stone bench where a faded plaque bore the Crestwell family crest. Hastings traced the inscription, noting the date, 1820. "This place has seen its share of secrets," he said. "Clara must have felt it coming here to uncover her roots." Poirot nodded. "Oui, and Grayson, he felt it too, the threat of losing what he had built. His fear drove him to murder, but it was Clara's courage that brought the truth to light." They returned to the hotel where Sergeant Brooks awaited them in the lounge, his notebook brimming with updates. "Mr. Poirot," he said, his voice eager, "we've traced Evelyn Henshaw. She's Clara's aunt living in Exeter. We sent a wire, and she's coming tomorrow to collect Clara's belongings. She's devastated, says Clara was like a daughter." Poirot's expression softened. "Bon, we will speak with her, Sergeant. She must know the full story of Clara's quest. Brooks hesitated, then added, "There's more, sir. Grayson's confessed fully. Says he found Clara's journal in her room the day before the murder, read about her claim, and panicked. He stole the letter opener from the study, wrote the note using an old monogrammed paper he found in the hotel's archives, and lured her to the library. He meant to confront her, but when she refused to drop her inquiries, he lost control." Poirot's eyes narrowed. "Lost control, you say?" "Non, Sergeant. Murder is never a loss of control. It is a choice, calculated and deliberate. Grayson chose to protect his world at the cost of Clara's life." Hastings felt a chill, despite the warming day. "And the scratch on the desk? The candles? How did they fit?" Poirot's mustache twitched. "The scratch, it was made by Grayson's ring as he leaned over the desk to strike, his haste betraying him. The candles, they were lit to create a false sense of calm, to suggest Clara was writing peacefully when he entered. But the ink smudge on her left hand, it came from the note he gave her, not the letter she wrote. The little gray cells, they noticed these contradictions." Brooks nodded, clearly impressed. "You've got a gift, Mr. Poirot. We'd have pinned it on that Anthony Vaughan fellow if not for you." Poirot's smile was faint. "The obvious, Sergeant, is rarely the truth. Anthony Vaughan was a convenient shadow, nothing more." As Brooks departed to finalize his report, Poirot turned to Hastings. "We must prepare for Mademoiselle Evelyn's arrival. She will want to know why Clara died, and we must give her the truth with care." They moved to the library, where Clara's journal lay on the desk, a silent testament to her determination. Poirot flipped through its pages, pausing at a sketch Clara had drawn, a rough outline of the Crestwell crest with a note, "Aunt Evelyn says the proof is in the Manor's records. I must find it." Hastings' heart sank. She was so close, Poirot. If only she'd had more time. Poirot's eyes softened. "Oui, mon ami, but her courage, it lives on. We will ensure her aunt knows her legacy, and the Crestwell claim will be examined." The day passed quietly, the hotel settling into an uneasy normalcy. The guests, though shaken, began to resume their routines, their conversations subdued. Lady Marwood spoke of returning to London, Whitmore buried himself in a book, and Langston offered medical advice to a shaken Mrs. Grayson. Hastings watched them, marveling at Poirot's ability to see through their facades to the truth beneath. As evening fell, Poirot and Hastings sat in the lounge, the sea now calm beyond the windows. "Poirot," Hastings said, "you always say the little gray cells see what others miss. But how do you bear it, the weight of these tragedies?" Poirot's expression was wistful. "The weight, Hastings, it is heavy, but it is my purpose. To bring order to chaos, to give voice to those who have been silenced. This is why I continue. The echoes of truth, they resonate, even in sorrow." The sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over Crestwell Manor. The mystery was solved, but its echoes lingered, a reminder of Clara's quest and Poirot's unwavering pursuit of justice. Chapter 14. The Arrival of Evelyn. The morning sun bathed Crestwell on sea in a gentle light, its rays glinting off the sea and softening the stark cliffs that framed the village. Crestwell Manor Hotel, though still marked by the tragedy of Clara Henshaw's murder, seemed to stir with a quiet hope as the day promised new revelations. Captain Arthur Hastings stood in the hotel's lounge, gazing out at the serene landscape, his thoughts heavy with the weight of Clara's unfulfilled quest. The discovery of her journal, with its mention of her Aunt Evelyn and the Crestwell inheritance, had given the case a poignant clarity, and Hastings knew that Hercule Poirot was determined to see Clara's truth honored. Poirot, impeccable in his black suit, sat nearby, his green eyes fixed on a small notebook, his mustache twitching as he reviewed the final threads of the mystery. "Poirot," Hastings said, turning from the window, "Evelyn Henshaw's arrival today. It feels like the final piece of Clara's story. Will you tell her everything about Grayson and the inheritance?" Poirot set down his notebook, his expression thoughtful. "Mon ami, the truth, it is a delicate thing. Mademoiselle Evelyn deserves to know why Clara died. But we must deliver this truth with care, for it carries both justice and sorrow. Clara's quest was to reclaim her heritage, and we must ensure her aunt can carry it forward." He rose, his cane tapping lightly as he crossed to the fireplace where a low fire crackled. "The journal, the letter to my dearest E, the Crestwell crest, they are not mere clues, Hastings. They are Clara's legacy, her voice speaking from beyond. Today we will give that voice to Evelyn." The lounge door opened and Sergeant Brooks entered, his face a mixture of duty and anticipation. "Mr. Poirot, Miss Evelyn Henshaw has just arrived. She's in the drawing room waiting to speak with you. Poor woman's in a state. Says Clara was her only family." Poirot nodded, his eyes softening. "Merci, Sergeant. We will join her at once. And the hotel records. Have you secured the documents Clara was researching?" Brooks patted his notebook. "Aye, sir. Found a box of old Crestwell papers in the attic. Deeds, letters, family records. Looks like Clara was right about a claim. There's mention of Amelia Vaughan's marriage to Edward Henshaw, and a will that left a portion of the estate to their line. Grayson must have known it could surface." Poirot's mustache twitched. "Bon. These papers. They will be crucial. Come, Hastings, let us meet Mademoiselle Evelyn." The drawing room was quiet, its heavy curtains drawn back to let in the morning light. Evelyn Henshaw sat in a high-backed chair, her silver hair pulled into a neat bun, her face lined with grief but resolute. She was a woman of late middle age, her eyes red-rimmed but sharp, clutching a handkerchief that bore no monogram. As Poirot and Hastings entered, she rose, her voice steady despite her emotion. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, I'm told you found the truth about my Clara. I want to know everything." Poirot inclined his head, his manner gentle but authoritative. "Madame Henshaw, please be seated. I am Hercule Poirot, and this is my friend Captain Hastings. We are deeply sorry for your loss. Clara was a brave young woman, and her story, it is one of courage and tragedy." Evelyn sat, her hands trembling slightly. "She wrote to me, you know, about her search. Her belief that we were tied to the Crestwell family. I told her to be careful, but I never imagined." Her voice broke and she dabbed her eyes. Poirot sat opposite her, his voice soft. "Madame, let us begin with what Clara discovered. She came to Crestwell Manor to trace her lineage, believing herself a descendant of Amelia Vaughan, who married Edward Henshaw, your late brother. Clara's journal and her letters to you confirm this. She found evidence of an inheritance, a claim to part of the Crestwell estate, which this hotel now occupies." Evelyn's eyes widened. "She mentioned it in her last letter, said she'd found records in the hotel's archives. I told her to consult a solicitor, but she wanted to be sure first. Was that why she was killed? Poirot nodded, his expression somber. Oui, madam. The proprietor, Rupert Grayson, learned of Clara's inquiries. He feared her claim would threaten his ownership of the hotel built on the old Crestwell estate. He lured her to the library with a note, using a monogrammed letter opener and handkerchief to cast suspicion on a fictitious A.V. He stabbed her, hoping to silence her forever. Evelyn's hand flew to her mouth, a sob escaping. My poor Clara. She only wanted the truth. Hastings, moved by her grief, said, "She was brave, Miss Henshaw. Her journal shows how determined she was." Poirot continued, his voice steady. The clues, they were many. The ink smudge on her hand from the note Grayson wrote, the scratch on the desk from his signet ring, the candles lit to create a false calm. But Clara's journal, it was the key. It led us to you and to the truth of her heritage. Evelyn's eyes met Poirot's, her voice firm despite her tears. What happens now? Will Clara's claim be honored? Poirot gestured to Brooks, who stepped forward with a small box of documents. These papers, madame, confirm the claim. Amelia Vaughan's will left a portion of the estate to her descendants, including your brother and, through him, Clara. With Grayson's arrest, the courts will review the claim. I will ensure these documents reach the proper authorities. Evelyn nodded, clutching the handkerchief. Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Clara would be so grateful. She loved this place, its history. She wanted to honor our family. Poirot's eyes softened. And she will, madame. Her courage has ensured the truth lives on. As Evelyn was led to Clara's room to collect her belongings, Hastings turned to Poirot. You've given her closure, Poirot. But what about Mrs. Grayson? She's lost everything. Her husband, her home. Poirot's expression was wistful. The consequences of truth, Hastings, they are often painful. Madame Grayson knew nothing of her husband's crime, but she must now face its aftermath. The hotel, it may pass to Evelyn's claim or it may remain. That is for the courts to decide. They stepped into the hall, where the remaining guests moved quietly, their voices subdued. Lady Marwood, packing to return to London, nodded curtly to Poirot. Whitmore, engrossed in a book, avoided their gaze. Langston offered a quiet word of thanks, his brooding demeanor softened by relief. The hotel, though scarred, was beginning to heal. As they walked toward the cliffs, Poirot paused, his eyes on the sea. The truth, Hastings, it is like the tide. It comes, it goes, but it always leaves its mark. Clara's story, it is a reminder that even in death one's purpose can endure. Hastings nodded, feeling the weight of the case lift slightly. You've done it again, Poirot. The little gray cells never fail. Poirot's smile was faint but proud. They serve mon ami as they must. Now let us return to London, the world. It has more mysteries to unravel. The sea sparkled under the sun, and Crestwell Manor stood silent, its secrets laid bare by the brilliance of Hercule Poirot. Chapter 15. The Final Departure. The sun hung low over Crestwell-on-Sea, casting a golden glow across the cliffs and bathing the village in a serene light that belied the tragedy that had unfolded within Crestwell Manor Hotel. The hotel, its ivy-clad walls and tall chimneys standing resolute, seemed to exhale a sigh of relief as the final pieces of Clara Henshaw's murder were laid to rest. Captain Arthur Hastings stood on the hotel's terrace, the sea breeze ruffling his hair as he reflected on the case that had consumed them. Hercule Poirot, impeccable in his black suit, stood beside him, his cane resting lightly in his hands, his green eyes fixed on the horizon with a contemplative air. The arrival of Evelyn Henshaw and the confirmation of Clara's claim to the Crestwell estate had brought a poignant closure, but Hastings sensed that Poirot's little gray cells were still weaving the final threads of the story. "Poirot," Hastings said, turning to his friend, "it's over, isn't it? Clara's truth is out, Grayson's in custody, and Evelyn will carry on her niece's legacy. Yet you seem unsettled. Is there something we've missed?" Poirot's mustache twitched, a faint smile playing at his lips. "Mon ami, you know me well. The case, it is solved, the murderer apprehended, the truth revealed. Yet the heart of Hercule Poirot, it lingers on the human cost, the ripples that spread from a single act of violence. Clara's courage, Evelyn's grief, the Graysons' loss, these are the threads that remain, even when the puzzle is complete." He turned, gesturing toward the hotel's entrance, where their bags were being loaded into a waiting car. "Come, Hastings. Our time here draws to a close, but we must reflect one last time before we depart." They walked back into the lounge where the remaining guests were preparing to leave. Lady Eleanor Marwood, her emerald brooch gleaming, was arranging her departure to London, her icy demeanor softened by the ordeal. Mr. Gerald Whitmore, his spectacles polished and his florid waistcoat neatly buttoned, sat with a book, though his eyes were distant. Dr. Maurice Langston stood by the window, his brooding silence replaced by a quiet resolve, as if the case had lifted a weight from his shoulders. Mrs. Beatrice Grayson, pale and fragile, was speaking softly with a solicitor, her future uncertain with her husband's arrest. Poirot paused by the fireplace, where the embers of last night's fire still glowed faintly. "Mes amis," he said, addressing the small group, "the tragedy of Crestwell Manor is at an end. Mademoiselle Clara Henshaw sought to reclaim her heritage, a claim tied to the Crestwell estate through her ancestor Amelia Vaughan. Rupert Grayson, fearing the loss of his hotel, took her life in a desperate act. The monogrammed letter opener, the note, the handkerchief, these were his tools of deception, designed to mislead. But the truth, it cannot be hidden from the little gray cells." Lady Marwood's lips tightened, but she nodded. "You've done a remarkable thing, Monsieur Poirot. Clara's death was a tragedy, but you've given her justice." Whitmore looked up from his book, his voice hesitant. I wish I'd spoken up sooner about her questions. Perhaps I could have helped her." Poirot's eyes softened. "Monsieur, regret is a heavy burden, but you acted as you thought best. The truth has prevailed." Langston stepped forward, his voice low. "I should have pressed Clara about her dreams, her fears. As a doctor, I failed her." Poirot shook his head. "Non, docteur. You gave her care, and that was your duty. The fault lies with the one who chose murder." Mrs. Grayson, her eyes brimming with tears, spoke last. "Monsieur Poirot, I'll never forgive myself for not seeing what Rupert was capable of. Clara was so kind, so full of life. How will I go on?" Poirot approached her, his voice gentle. "Madame, you must find strength in the truth. Your husband's actions were his own, not yours. You will rebuild, as this hotel will, in time." He turned to Evelyn Henshaw, who had joined them, clutching Clara's journal. "Madam Henshaw, you carry Clara's legacy. The documents we found, the will, the records, they will support your claim to the Crestwell estate. The courts will decide, but her courage has ensured her voice endures." Evelyn's eyes shone with gratitude and sorrow. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. Clara would be so proud to know her truth reached me. I'll fight for her, for our family." Poirot inclined his head. "Bon, then our work here is truly done." As the guests dispersed, Hastings and Poirot walked to the library one final time. The room, now tidied and free of the blood-stained rug, felt almost peaceful. Poirot paused by the desk where the half-finished letter to my dearest E had once lain. "This letter," he said, "it was Clara's heart, her hope. She wrote to Evelyn seeking to share her discovery. The ink smudge, the scratch, the candles, they were the echoes of her final moments, but they led us to the truth." Hastings nodded, his throat tight. "She was so young, Poirot. It's hard to think of her gone, but you've made sure her story lives on." Poirot's smile was wistful. "The story, Hastings, it is never truly gone. It lives in those who remember, who act, who seek justice. Clara's quest, it was noble, and we have honored it." They stepped outside where the car awaited to take them to the station. Sergeant Brooks approached, his notebook tucked away. "Mr. Poirot, Captain Hastings, you've done Crestwell a service. We'll take it from here. Grayson's trial, the estate claim. Safe travels." Poirot bowed slightly. "Merci, Sergeant. The little gray cells, they are always at the service of justice." As they settled into the car, the hotel receding behind them, Hastings looked at Poirot. "You always find the truth, Poirot, no matter how tangled the web. But does it ever get easier?" Poirot's eyes were distant, fixed on the sea. "Non, mon ami. Each case, it carries its own weight, its own sorrow. But to bring order to chaos, to give voice to the silenced, this is why I continue. The little gray cells, they do not rest, but they find purpose in the truth." The car wound through the village, the cliffs and sea fading into the distance. Crestwell Manor Hotel stood as a silent sentinel, its secrets unveiled, its wounds beginning to heal. Clara Henshaw's legacy would endure, carried by her aunt and the truth Poirot had uncovered. As the train whistle sounded in the distance, Hastings felt a quiet pride in his friend's brilliance, knowing that wherever they went next, the little gray cells would be ready for the next mystery. The sun dipped below the horizon, and Crestwell-on-Sea faded into memory, a chapter closed by the genius of Hercule Poirot.